From Carla Fay Tucker, who spent her final moments asking for forgiveness, to Christina Riggs, who said her last wish was to be reunited with the children she killed, to Cameron Todd Willingham, who went to his death insisting he was innocent. These are inmates whose final wishes left everyone shaken. On June 13, 1983, in Houston, Texas, Carla Fay Tucker accompanied her boyfriend Daniel Garrett to the apartment of Jerry Dean. After several days of drug use, Tucker and Garrett murdered Dean and a woman who had had the bad luck to be with him that night, Deborah Ruth Thornton. Tucker was sentenced to death for killing 2 people with a pickaxe during a burglary. The weapon was found at the scene. The details were savage, and in 1984, both Tucker and Garrett were convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. But this story did not end the way anyone expected. Tucker's early life had been a cascade of dysfunction. She had a difficult childhood. Her father had given up on her as a child. Her mother died from the effects of drug abuse on Christmas Eve, 1979, and her mother had gotten her into prostitution at the age of 14. By the time she was 24 in 1983, Carla Fay Tucker was a high school dropout and drug addict who had been involved in prostitution since she was a teen. None of that excuses a double murder. But what happened on death row is where the story takes its turn. While Garrett died of liver disease before his execution, Tucker underwent an intense transformation in prison and became a Christian, and not the kind of conversion that people roll their eyes at. One journalist described her as the nicest woman on death row, noting that it is virtually impossible to look at this attractive, sweet-natured, born-again Christian and imagine the gruesome crime to which she confessed. Her case became a lightning rod. Tucker's plea for a second chance stirred many, including Pope John Paul II, the European Parliament, and the TV evangelist Pat Robertson. The Pat Robertson part is worth pausing on. A conservative televangelist who championed the death penalty was now publicly lobbying to save the life of a convicted murderer. Robertson told 60 Minutes that Tucker had his support, and that if Bush lets this sweet woman of God die, he's a man who shows no mercy. Carla Fay Tucker was creating a showdown within the American evangelical community between supporters of a long-standing moral and political position in favor of the death penalty and their brethren who were lobbying for this rare exception. And at the center of it all stood Governor George W. Bush. Bush, who also had a public religious conversion, wanted to appear tough on crime, despite Tucker's expressions of remorse and redemption and the outcry for clemency from various individuals and organizations. Bush refused to block Tucker's execution. On the night before her execution, Tucker spent her time in a 12-foot by 20-foot holding cell. She barely slept. She was hoping a last-moment miracle would save her life the next day, but she knew the odds were slim. The next morning, she refused a typical breakfast, but snacked on some crackers and drank a soft drink. Between 8 and 12 that morning, she visited with her father and sister. She also visited with her husband, Dana Brown, the prison preacher who helped her convert to Christianity. The two had married by proxy in 1995. Those last moments with her family would occur with a screen between them. For her last meal, Tucker requested a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. She didn't eat much of it. Before 6 p.m., she took a shower and put on a fresh white prison uniform and white shoes. With her hair still wet, she was taken from her cell and got on the gurney at 6:05 p.m. She was strapped in and had catheters placed in each arm. Then Carla Fay Tucker spoke her last words. She said to all present, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that she was so sorry. She hoped God would give them peace. She looked at her husband. "Baby, I love you." She looked at Ronald Carlson. "Ron, give Peggy a hug for me." She looked at all present, weeping and smiling. "Everybody has been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." The reporter who witnessed her execution described her as calm and composed right to the end. But the aftermath tells you how deep the wound went. The captain of the death house team, Fred Allen, who had managed over 120 executions, suffered an emotional breakdown within days of Tucker's execution. He resigned his job, giving up his pension, and changed his position on the death penalty. He later said, "I was pro-capital punishment after Carla Fay and after all this. Until this day, 11 years later, no sir." That is the weight of a last wish when people believe the person making it has genuinely changed. Tucker asked for nothing for herself. She asked only to give love, to receive forgiveness, and to wait for the people she cared about on the other side. She was the first woman to be executed in the United States since Velma Barfield in 1984, and the first in Texas since 1863. and her final words became one of the most referenced moments in the history of American capital punishment. If Tucker's case was about whether a transformed person should die, the case of Christina Marie Riggs was about whether a broken person should be allowed to. Christina Marie Riggs was convicted of the November 1997 murders of her two children, Justin Dalton Thomas, age 5, and Shelby Alexis Riggs, age 2. She didn't fight the charges, she didn't contest the facts. In fact, she asked the jury for the death sentence, telling them, "I want to die. I want to be with my babies. I want you to give me the death penalty." That request from a mother who killed her own children and then wanted to die for it stopped people cold. An eternity ago, Christina Riggs spent her days shuttling her two preschool children to daycare, working as a licensed practical nurse, and managing a calamitous love life. Now her days were filled with monotony, silence, solitude, and soul-crushing guilt. She had been convicted of smothering her two preschool-aged children in their beds. The details of the crime were harrowing. Riggs was a licensed practical nurse, and she planned to kill her children using drugs obtained from her workplace. After an injection failed to kill her son, she smothered both children and then attempted suicide. Her oldest child, Justin, was injected with potassium chloride, but in an error, Riggs failed to dilute the substance. The child jolted awake in agony. She injected him with morphine to numb his pain, but he remained alive. A medical examiner later declared the cause of death for Justin and his sister Shelby to be suffocation. They had been smothered to death with a pillow. Then Riggs tried to end her own life. She failed. The next day, Riggs' mother opened the door to her daughter's Sherwood duplex. Frantically, she told a 911 dispatcher, "My daughter and her babies are dead." But first responders found a trace of life in Riggs. What drove a mother to this? By her own account, the torment of her life came after a lifetime of sexual abuse, depression, and failed relationships. The end of her marriage put Christina in a spin cycle familiar to many single parents. Child support payments were as scarce as the fathers themselves. A budget shared by two now had to be supported by one, leading to a need to work more hours. She was working at Arkansas Heart Hospital and supplementing with shifts at a temporary nursing agency, all while trying to manage two preschoolers and the weight of depression that had been crushing her for years. The prosecution saw things differently. Prosecuting attorney Larry Jagley said the jury saw a different Christina Riggs. Essentially, what the jury saw was that she was self-centered, that she viewed the children as an inconvenience and an interference with what she wanted to pursue. She placed her interests above those of the children. But on death row, Riggs became what officials called a volunteer, a distinction that set Riggs apart from the rest of Arkansas's condemned inmates. Because while many claw desperately for life through legal appeals, she said she had appealed her death sentence only reluctantly. Riggs said she believed her children were in heaven and that she would join them there when she died. "I know it sounds crazy," she said, "but the torture I have put myself through every day is worse than anything you can imagine." Alone in her cell, the condemned woman said death row was a state of mind. She continued to be haunted by the memory of her children. "A lot of regret, that's what goes through my mind, day in, day out. God's punishing me. He let me live so I would suffer." She often wished she was doing only a 10-year stretch and that her children were still alive. "I'd give anything to have 10 years if I just knew my kids were on the other side of the fence waiting for me." On May 2, 2000, Christina Riggs was brought to the execution chamber. The execution began 18 minutes late because of difficulty in finding a suitable vein to put the catheters into. Christina agreed to have the catheters placed in veins in her wrists. Then she spoke her last words. Strapped to the gurney, she said, "There's no way, no words can express how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies, as I always intended." She also said, "I love you, my babies." 9 minutes later, Riggs, 28, died from a lethal injection of potassium chloride. She waived her appeals and was executed by lethal injection, less than 2 years after her convictions, becoming the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845. Riggs also remains the youngest woman to be executed in the United States in the modern era. Her case did not ignite the same national debate as Tucker's. There were no celebrity televangelists demanding clemency. But it left behind a question that lingers. What happens when the punishment a person receives is the one they asked for, and their last wish is not to live but to die? The previous two stories are about people who admitted what they did. The next one is about a man who never stopped denying it, and who may have been telling the truth the whole time. Cameron Todd Willingham was convicted and executed for the murder of his 3 young children by arson at the family home in Corsicana, Texas, on December 23, 1991. On that morning, Willingham, who was asleep when the fire started, survived. His wife was at the Salvation Army buying Christmas presents for the girls. Willingham was convicted of setting a fire at his home that killed the children, including 1-year-old twins. At his trial, he was offered a life term in exchange for a guilty plea, which he turned down, insisting he was innocent. He was convicted based on the testimony of forensic experts, who said they had determined that the fire was intentionally set, and a jailhouse informant who said Willingham had confessed to him. On October 29, 1992, he was sentenced to death. 12 years later, on February 17, 2004, Cameron Todd Willingham was led to the execution chamber. His last words, recorded by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, were direct. "The only statement I want to make is that I am an innocent man, convicted of a crime I did not commit. I have been persecuted for 12 years for something I did not do. From God's dust I came, and to dust I will return, so the earth shall become my throne." He expressed love to a person named Gabby, and then, according to witness accounts, he addressed his ex-wife, Stacy Kuykendall, who was watching about 8 feet away through a window, and said several times, "I hope you rot in hell, bitch." The outburst was jarring, raw, and furious. His former wife showed no reaction to the outburst. People who believed he was guilty pointed to those words as evidence of his character. People who believed he was innocent saw the rage of a man who had been condemned for a crime he did not commit, watching the mother of his dead children sit comfortably while he died. And then the evidence started to shift. Since Willingham's 2004 execution, significant controversy has arisen over the legitimacy of the guilty verdict and the interpretation of the evidence used to convict him of arson and murder. Willingham's case was criticized by a 2004 Chicago Tribune article, discussed again in a 2009 investigative report in The New Yorker, and this coverage suggested that the arson evidence was misinterpreted. According to a 2009 investigative report by an expert hired by the Texas Forensic Science Commission, the original claims of arson were doubtful. The Chicago Tribune concluded that the case had been reviewed by 9 of the nation's top fire scientists, first for the Tribune, then for the Innocence Project, and now for the Commission. All concluded that the original investigators relied on outdated theories and folklore to justify the determination of arson. The only other evidence of significance against Willingham was twice recanted testimony by another inmate. Jailhouse informants are viewed with skepticism in the justice system. The jailhouse informant Johnny Webb later gave a detailed account that ripped the prosecution's case wide open. Webb gave his first detailed account of how he lied on the witness stand, in return for efforts by the former prosecutor, John H. Jackson, to reduce Webb's prison sentence, and to arrange thousands of dollars in support from a wealthy Corsicana rancher. And in his own words, Webb said Willingham never told me nothing. Willingham always claimed his innocence, and the arson investigation used to convict him was questioned by leading experts before he was executed. Since 2004, further evidence in the case has led to the inescapable conclusion that Willingham did not set the fire for which he was executed. Before his death, Willingham had asked those close to him to keep fighting. Before his execution, Todd Willingham said, "Please don't ever stop fighting to vindicate me." That was his last wish, not to be remembered, not to be mourned, but to be proven right. Opponents of the death penalty have long focused on questionable evidence used against Willingham, believing that his case could be the first to show conclusively that an innocent man was put to death in the modern era of capital punishment. Whether you believe he was guilty or innocent, the weight of the scientific evidence is staggering, and it came too late. The ones who just said, "I love you." Not every last wish makes headlines. Some are quiet, some are simple, and those in their own way cut even deeper. Used by 63% of all speakers, love is the most common word in death row inmates' last statements. At 689 total instances, that works out to an average of 1.7 times per inmate. More than anger, more than regret, more than declarations of innocence. Love. Researchers categorized the themes in 100 last statements made by Texas death row inmates and found 9 themes, the most common being references to love, spirituality, apologizing to the victim's family, and regret for the offense. The final statements included, on average, a higher percentage of positive emotion words than negative emotion words, with over 80% of death row inmates speaking more positive than negative emotion words. Think about that for a moment. People who were convicted of the worst crimes human beings can commit, strapped to a table, seconds from death, and over 80% of them chose positivity. The reviewed text analysis studies demonstrated that final statements contain surprisingly more positive than negative emotional expressions, with content themes revolving most strongly around expressions of love and appreciation, messages to relevant social others, and religious beliefs. Prisoners' final statements spoken moments prior to death seem to focus on aspects, including social connections and religion, that make life and death meaningful. Consider the case of Johnny Ray Connor, executed in Texas on August 22, 2007. His last words were, "This is destiny. This is life. This is something Allah wants me to do. I'm not mad at you. When I get to the gates of heaven, I'm going to be waiting for you. Please forgive me." Or Donald Jones, executed in Missouri on April 27, 2005. To my mother, who truly has been hurt the most, your love and strength I carry with me always. Take care of my son. I'm finally free and I'm going home to grandmother now. I love you all, and God bless. Or Cornelius Singleton, executed in Alabama on November 20, 1992, whose entire statement was, "Let Mama know I still love her. Keep that chin up." Or William Jones, executed in Missouri in 2002. "My darling Gertie, my wife, I love you endlessly, my honeybird. Till we meet again. Stay strong. Love, Billy." These statements weren't performances. The typical death row inmate spends nearly 11 years waiting for an execution date. Plenty of time to ruminate and plan a speech. And yet a large percentage of them use this freedom to express love and sorrow. Despite their criminal histories, death row inmates seem to have particularly good manners. Last statements contain high rates of the phrase, "thank you," as well as the words "sorry" and "please." Even the ritual of the last meal plays into this, where they are allowed inmates select foods that bring them comfort, either through high calorific content or because it is a brand that has past positive associations. Many may also select prestige foods or simply foods, textures, and tastes that have been denied to them during their incarceration. And here's an interesting pattern. Those who deny their guilt are significantly more likely to also refuse a last meal, arguably because to consume it signifies on some level that they consent to the execution process. Juan Martin Garcia, a gang member who fatally shot a Christian missionary during a robbery that yielded just $8, used his final words to face the family of his victim. On October 6, 2015, moments before being executed, Garcia used his final words to apologize to the victim's widow and children and express his remorse. "The harm that I did to your dad and husband, I hope this brings you closure," he said. Professor Kirkmeyer says many see last statements as serving the purpose of forcing the condemned to reflect upon their crimes and lives. Often these statements include words of repentance and regret. Such statements meet our expectations of what last words should be, and such statements may provide some solace to those harmed, the ones who made people uncomfortable. Not all last wishes are tender. Some are sharp, unsettling, darkly funny, or downright bizarre. And in their own way, they make people feel things they weren't prepared to feel. John Spenkelink, during his time on death row, claimed he was only being executed because he couldn't afford better legal representation. His last words mirrored these sentiments. "Capital punishment," he said before being electrocuted in 1979. "Them without the capital get the punishment." Spenkelink made headlines as the first convicted criminal to be executed in Florida after capital punishment was reinstated in 1976. That one-liner forced a conversation that persists to this day, a conversation about who sits on death row and why. Then there's Patrick Brian Knight. In 1991, Knight and an accomplice abducted a couple next door and locked them in their basement. The following night, Knight blindfolded them, drove them to a secluded area, and shot them. While awaiting his execution, he used websites and mail to ask for the best jokes he could use as his final statement. He received 1,300 jokes and was able to narrow it down to 5. But he ended up naming several inmates he believed were innocent and using his own joke. He used his dying breath for two things: humor and advocacy. That combination, The absurd meeting the profound hit different. And then there was Thomas Grasso, who strangled an elderly woman with Christmas lights during a robbery. His last words were, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Although his last meal included 4 dozen steamed mussels, a Burger King double cheeseburger, he was disappointed that they substituted spaghetti for SpaghettiOs. It sounds like a joke. People did laugh, but underneath the laughter was something unsettling. A man about to die, and the last thing on his mind was a canned pasta product. Then there's the case of Ricky Lee Sanderson, executed in North Carolina on January 30th, 1998. He declined his last meal because he had very strong convictions about abortion and the 33 million babies that have been aborted in this country. Those babies never got a first meal, and that's why I didn't take the last in their memory. Whether you agree with his position or not, the gesture was unexpected. A convicted criminal using his last act of agency to make a political statement about the unborn. And Jimmy Glass, who escaped jail and murdered an elderly couple, looked at the electric chair and delivered one of the most memorable one-liners in death row history. "I'd rather be fishing." These moments land hard because they reveal something uncomfortable, that the condemned are still human. Professor Kirchmeier explains, a large percentage of people on death row have mental illness, brain damage, and other issues that may lead to what we see as strange last statements. Those unusual statements often get the most attention in the press as showing the condemned was evil, but they are mainly signifying that we are executing damaged human beings. The weight of a final word. So what does all of this mean? Death is a universal experience, but for those sentenced to die by execution, death is often a specific date and time. A countdown to one's final moments. Before the act of taking a death row prisoner's life, the condemned are given an opportunity to speak their last words. The modern U.S. practice developed out of a long practice going back at least hundreds of years, probably longer, says law professor Jeff Kirchmeier. There was probably a religious aspect of the tradition too, giving the condemned an opportunity to repent before going to the next world. Kirchmeier says, their statements would also warn others watching of the dangers of various vices. In Texas, where the majority of these records come from, since 1976, more than 1/3 of all 1,465 executions in the U.S. have occurred. As part of the execution process, death row inmates in Texas are allowed a last statement, and transcripts are made public after death on the Texas Department of Criminal Justice website. In the presence of the warden and chaplain, the last words may be spoken into a microphone. After the inmate has been strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber, when the inmate has finished the statement, the warden signals for the lethal injection to begin. Of the 527 executions between December 1982 and June 2015 studied, 1119 of the inmates had declined to make a last statement. Of the 407 with spoken last words, 178 were white, 150 were black, 77 were Hispanic. Their mean age at execution was 39 years, and they had been on death row for an average of nearly 11 years. Their statements contained a total of 42,328 words, an average of 104 words per inmate, ranging from 1 word to 1,268 words. That's it. 104 words. That is the average space a person gets to summarize their existence, say goodbye, declare innocence, beg forgiveness, or make peace with God. Carla Fay Tucker used hers to tell people she would wait for them. Christina Riggs used hers to say she could finally be with the children she'd killed. Cameron Todd Willingham used his to insist one final time that he was innocent. And thousands of others used theirs to simply say, "I love you." How do individuals emotionally cope with the imminent salience of mortality? Research suggests that an increased use of positive emotion words serves as a way to protect and defend against mortality salience of one's own contemplated death. Or maybe in those final seconds, people just stop pretending. The masks fall, the ego dissolves, and what's left is what was always underneath: love, regret, fear, hope, and a desperate human wish to matter. The last words of the condemned are not just about the condemned. They are about all of us, about what we value, what we forgive, and what we carry long after the execution chamber goes silent.